it up, swashbucklers! You're listening to Under the Crossbones. My name is Phil Johnson. I'm your host for the show. Thank you once again for tuning in. This is episode number 65 that you can find at underthecrossbones.com/065 for all the show notes and such. Fun fact about the number 65, chicken 65 is a South Indian dish that was introduced in 1965 at the Buhari Hotel restaurant in Chennai. And it's called Chicken 65, they think, because it came out in 1965. They also introduced like a 1978 and a 1992 version, like car models, I guess. Or they think maybe that the original chef put 65 chilies in the original dish. Or they say it might have been the 65th menu item on that particular menu. But either way, I've never had Chicken 65. I feel like I need to go find some now and see what it's all about. So anyway, episode number 65. My guest today, I've been hanging on to this episode for a little while. It's been in the hopper for a while, and I'm glad I finally get it out to you here. My guests on the show today are Courtney Page and Kenyon from the Queen Anne's Revenge Project. So last week, we talked to Michael Manercha about Blackbeard and his mistress's little house up there in Pennsylvania. This week, we're going to hear about Blackbeard's ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. It's a double dose of Blackbeard. I feel like I should do that like a rock station, like a rock radio station. It's a double shot of Blackbeard for your week today. Maybe not. I don't know. Anyway, so Courtney Page is the lab manager of the Queen Anne's Revenge Project, and Kenyon is a conservator and the field director of the excavation. So these two people are deep in the project, and it's a really fascinating conversation I think you're going to dig. So we'll get to that in just a second. And so I was telling you last week that my dryer blew up, right? Big black spot on the computer, got a new dryer, shipped in, great. He got here, and we were putting it in. My dad and I were wrestling it into the garage and getting it all hooked up and all that kind of stuff. And he goes, hey, there's a lot of water underneath your water heater, which is not where the water for the water heater is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be underneath it. It's supposed to be inside of it. And so discovered the water heater was leaking. This is like lessons in why home ownership can be a drag sometimes, right? Anyway, so we got the dryer in. Now we had to replace the water heater, and like quickly, because I'm leaving town again in a couple of days, right? So my girlfriend and I, we rush through our research project, and we go buy ourselves a water heater, and then we find out that it costs more than the water heater to have the water heater installed, which, oh boy. All right. Anyway, so we ended up getting a good deal through a friend of mine, her plumber guy that did a bunch of work on her house, my friend Lindy, and we got a guy named Pilo. If you're in my area here in the San Jose area and you need a good plumber, I will hook you up with Pilo, because Pilo did the job and he did it for a much more reasonable price than everybody was looking at. And we got the water heater in, right? So new dryer, new water heater. I look out the window of my office. Window I'm looking out right now. I look out the window. Part of my fence has fallen down. Home ownership, you guys. Home ownership is a drag sometimes. My fence had fallen down. Big portion of the fence had fell down. So that was a whole day this weekend. Was putting a new portion of fence up, which is great. So far, nothing right now is broken, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed because anything could happen. You're listening to this. This comes out on Tuesday, the 8th, which is election day. Lots of things could be broken if this doesn't go well, right? Here's my thought on election day. Every holiday we have is pretty much an excuse to eat too much food, right? It doesn't matter. Christmas, Easter, Arbor Day. I don't know. I eat on Arbor Day. Election day, all you get is a little sticker that says I voted. I call BS. I think we need to make it an excuse to eat more food. So nothing's broken so far. We'll find out what the election's results look like. I'm doing a show tonight, as you're listening to this, tonight on November the 8th, because I was brilliant enough to book a set on a night where nobody will care about watching comedy. And my set will start one of either two ways, because I'm not going to be on stage until about 9 o'clock. And it's going to be either, dodged a bullet on that one, or, here we go. That's going to be my opening right there. So anyway, that's if you're around the area. I'm going to be at O'Malley's in Mountain View. That's Tuesday, November 8th tonight, if you're listening to this the day it comes out. And then I'm headed out to the Midwest again. Friday, November 11th, I'll be at Rookie Sports Pub in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Saturday, November 12th, I will be at Cuckoo's Comedy Club in Schofield, Wisconsin. And then Thursday through Saturday, November 17 to 19, I will be at Zany's Comedy Club in St. Charles, Illinois, with Dwayne Kennedy. That's going to be a fun set of shows there. That's going to be a kick. So, yeah, nothing broken at the moment, but who knows what will be broken by the time I get back. Actually, speaking of broken, let me tell you, I'm going to give you a little background story of here's what happens in comedy sometimes. So if you were listening last week, you mentioned one of the tour dates that I mentioned was I would be playing the Joke Room in Bakersfield, California. And Bakersfield is not a town I've played a lot. I've played there once previously, so I'm not a draw there, right? And the Joke Room is a sort of floating comedy club. It moves around to different places. And I had played there once before. A guy invited me back, this time for 2 nights to headline, which is very nice of him. The guy that books it and runs it is a comic himself, somebody that I've known for a lot of years. And so I get to Bakersfield. I go to the venue, what I thought was the venue. Turns out different venue. I was at the wrong hotel. I was at the 4 Point Sheraton. Supposed to be at the DoubleTree. By the way, I wasn't staying at either one of those. No, I was staying at the Easy 8 Motel, which had questionable aspects. We'll leave it at that. So anyway, I find myself to the DoubleTree, where the comedy club is located tonight. And I go in, and it's a much larger room than I had played previously there, which I thought, okay, I hope he's got it together. It's cool. And I asked the bartender, and I said, hey, is this where the comedy show is? And she said, comedy show? ? That's never a good. All right. And I said, she said, well, if there is one, this is where it would be. Great. So I text the promoter, and he's on his way. He says he'll be there in about 10 minutes. So we get there, and it's about an hour before showtime. No crowd yet, because it's an hour. We got time, right? And he says, we're going to start about 8:15. I said, fantastic. We get all the sound set up, guitars tuned, ready to go. Everything's golden. And now it's getting about 10 to 8. 10 to 8, still no audience, like zero audience. Well, like a couple of bar stragglers, just barfly dudes who are hanging around the hotel, but they're not there for the comedy show, and they're not going to pay attention if I talk to them anyway. So there's that. So we get to about 10 after 8, still no audience. And like I said, I'm not a draw in Bakersfield. I've only played there once before, so I was kind of relying on the promoter to bring an audience in. And so he is perturbed. He and his partner are perturbed. Not at me, but my friend waves me outside, and he goes, okay, how about if we do this? He said, would you take half your pay, and we're going to call it a weekend? And I said, so no show tonight? He said, no show tonight. I said, tomorrow night? He said, no show. So basically he said, we're not going to do any shows, but I'm going to pay you half of what I owe you, and you can stay in the hotel room. And he said, you can stay in the hotel room an extra day if you want, since you're going to be here tomorrow anyway. I said, no, I'm going to leave. I'm going to go home and fix things, like my fence. And so I explained to him that my house was falling apart as well. So that was pretty much it. I did no shows over the weekend. The shows were canceled. He gave me half of my money, and I was fine with that because all I did was drive to Bakersfield and back. So it was almost like being an Uber driver with no passengers, strangely. Very odd. So sometimes things like that happen. Nobody shows up for the party, and but usually they don't. Some places won't pay you at all, which is a drag. This guy's a comic, so he knows, and he was like, "If you want the whole amount, I'll give you the whole amount." And I said, "No, if you were just a regular booker guy, just some random dude booking me for a show, I'd probably hold you to it. But since he was a comic, I didn't want to hold him to it, and I know what his money situation is like and where he was kind of sitting with that. So, yeah, I did no shows last weekend." But still made some money. So there it is. That's it wasn't as fun, but it was still somewhat. I get to pay the bills a little bit. So anyway, yeah, that happens sometimes in comedy at this level where just nobody comes to the party and we go home and talk to the wall. We talk to the wall a lot. I went back to my hotel room. Actually, plan B was donuts. I got some donuts at a place called Sugar something or other there in Bakersfield. It wasn't called Sugar something or other. I just can't remember the name. And I got a couple of donuts and a cannoli, and I was like, ooh, they got cannolis. I'm going to have a cannoli. It turns out they don't know what a cannoli is. It had a cannoli shell and then filled with whipped cream, which is wrong. Cannolis are not filled with whipped cream. They're filled with a ricotta cheese mixture, sweetened, very tasty, but this was not a cannoli. So on the off chance that you sugar whatever dudes are listening from Bakersfield, like I know you're not, but if you are, fix your cannolis because that's not a cannoli. All right, I've yabbered enough. We're going to get into this episode here with Kim and Courtney from the Queen Anne's Revenge Project. This is a really fun episode. I've been looking forward to bringing it to you. Let's dig in. Here's Courtney Page and Kim Kenyon from the Queen Anne's Revenge Project. Enjoy. Kim and Courtney, you guys are involved with the Queen Anne's Revenge Project, and there's so many things to talk about, so many questions to ask. But first, can you give me a little bit of background on how the ship was found and the process since then, as sort of a thumbnail?
Okay. So there have been a lot of people looking into the history of this ship for quite a while, for many decades. So there's been a lot of historical research about where the Queen Anne's Revenge might be located. So in 1996, a private company called Intersal was searching for a Spanish treasure ship, the El Salvador, and came across this shipwreck. And, they already had a lot of this historical information in hand. And it became pretty clear that this could be Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge. So it was decided after several years of surveying that the shipwreck would be completely excavated. It was a very important wreck, just because it's a 17th century wreck, even if it wasn't Blackbeard's ship. And also because it was in a lot of danger from dredging and hurricanes coming through. The site itself is not very deep. It's about 25 feet of water. So it was decided by the state of North Carolina, who became involved in the project, that we would completely excavate the shipwreck. So in 2005, they started that. And then our conservation lab was set up the year before, in 2004, at East Carolina University. So we've had a partnership with the university as well since then. So what else? We've been continuing to excavate. So far, about 60% of the site has been excavated. And of course, our excavation depends on the availability of funding, since we are a state-run agency. We've excavated about 60% of the site. We've recovered several hundreds of thousands of artifacts so far. So once they are excavated, they come from the site, which is located in the Beaufort Inlet. I forgot to mention that. And they come up to Greenville, and we conserve them here in our lab.
Okay, interesting. Now, what was it that took 9 years between finding the shipwreck and then deciding to actually excavate it? What was that process like?
Well, it takes a long time to gain momentum to begin an excavation. Excavation's a really expensive undertaking. We also had to be sure that the ship we were dealing with was the one that we initially identified. So it took a lot of research and establishment of what kinds of artifacts we had, the dates of them, the size of the ship, the location, in comparison with historical information that we knew to be true about the Blackbeard ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge. So that all took some time to gather before we could establish the identity of the wreck.
Okay.
So by the time we did that, we could positively say, okay, we're certain this is the right ship. It's historically very important. No other pirate ship had been archaeologically excavated at the time, so it was an important window into not only colonial heritage of North Carolina, but this idea of what we can learn about pirates in general from a pirate ship. It was just a lot of fundraising in the meantime to get it initiated. It's all about money.
Certainly.
It's also important to, if you're excavating a wreck, you need to have a long-term plan for those artifacts. So a lot of that time was also spent in pulling together how we were going to set up this conservation lab.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah. Now, what were some of the things that were found that did positively ID it as the Queen Anne's Revenge? What kind of things were you looking for to make that ID?
Well, there was no... there's no smoking gun artifact that tells us without doubt this is the Queen Anne's Revenge. It's a large puzzle of all small pieces. So what were found early on were artifacts that we could date to a certain time period, namely the wine bottles that were specifically manufactured in 1714, The number of cannon found very early on in the wreck was a good indicator. Not just any merchant is sailing around with that kind of firepower. To date, we have found 30 cannon on the site.
Wow.
So that's a big indicator. So those kind of things, those really datable artifacts and the nature of the assemblage itself kind of led us into the right area to make that determination.
Okay, interesting. And so tell me a little bit about the process. I'm always interested in the process of what you're doing to conserve the objects that you are bringing up. Tell me a little bit, I mean, basically how you do your job, but tell me a little bit about that process for different items.
Right, okay, well, that's a big topic.
Certainly.
Well, I guess the most numerous artifact that we have, other than lead shot, we have, what, a quarter million lead shots. So that's,
oh my gosh.
Lead is pretty straightforward. It gets dried out and documented and it's done. I think the other very noticeable artifact type on site is iron. We do have a lot of iron artifacts, namely in the form of these large cannons. We've got a couple hundred cannonballs and things you fire out of the cannon, but people love cannon. So we do have 30 of them. Now, the treatment for any iron specifically is quite a drawn-out process. Iron, when it corrodes on the seabed, forms this dense crust around it as a result of not only the corrosion, but colonization by marine life and just the encapsulation by the sand. And as this crust expands, it collects any artifacts in the near vicinity that don't also concrete in that way. So we find a lot of glass and everything else embedded in the incrustation around iron objects. Mm-hmm. So once we bring things back here, we generally X-ray those. So they're called concretions. It's an aggregate very similar to concrete, so it's the name.
Right.
So we'll X-ray those and try to determine what's in them, what materials they're made of, and then we can start very slowly chiseling out all of those artifacts. We use an air scribe, which is a tiny little pneumatic chisel, to slowly excavate through the concreted layers to find artifacts within them. Once that occurs, we break down a concretion, all of your artifacts are separated out, and then they all undergo separate treatments. So back to the iron, that is by far the most time-consuming process. So it might take us, for a cannon, for example, once it's recovered from the seabed, it comes here. We could spend anywhere from 6 months to a year getting all of the concretion off of it, depending on what we find in it. And then the next segment of the process is the longest. Now we have to worry about getting all the salt out of the metal. Because even something as robust as iron, once it's been in a saturated salt environment for upwards of 300 years, like our wreck, everything is laden with salt. So we have to desalinate anything before it's allowed to dry out. So for a cannon, that process can take, on average, about 5 years to complete, just the desalination alone.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a lot. A lot of people don't get, because a lot of people don't see the behind the scenes of the conservation lab. So then following desalination, we'll dry it out and apply protective coating so that it can safely be displayed. So in total, a cannon can take up to 10 years to complete conservation.
That's craziness. That's
yeah, and we have 30 of them so far.
Oh my gosh. And so that I always find that stuff really interesting. As far as your particular jobs, I know, Courtney, you're the lab manager, and Kim, you do a bunch of the conservation stuff. Have either of you actually been down to the wreck itself?
I have. I'm, in addition to being one of the conservators here in the lab, I'm also the field director. So when we are excavating, I get to oversee all the archaeological direction on site. So I'm very hands-on and in the water most of the time during the season.
That's great.
I've been on the boat.
That's cool. So I have two questions. First of all, a lot of people listening to this, I'm sure, are thinking, that sounds like an awesome job. How do I get to that job? So tell me a little bit about your backgrounds and how you but how you made your way towards this type of occupation.
Well, I got interested in archaeology when I was really young, visiting some historical sites throughout the country. And kind of took various paths, but once I got to college, I kind of realized that that's definitely what I want to do. So I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, and then I came to East Carolina University specifically for their historical archaeology program, master's degree program. So I actually got involved in specifically conservation and underwater archaeology because working at this lab was my assistantship. And then I realized through that process that this is definitely what I would like my career to become.
What is it that drew you to it?
It's a mystery. I think, and the connection to people who lived 300 years ago. You know, we have a kind of unique job in that we're the first people to touch these things that were touched by pirates 300 years ago, and have kind of been lost to history in the meantime. So I think that historical connection, and then, you know, there's oftentimes we come across things where we've never seen them before, or we don't know how they were used. Kind of the puzzle solving aspect of this field as well is what really drew me to archaeology.
That's great. And Kim?
So I guess I was a kid as well. I think I was about 12, and I was always very interested in archaeology, mainly that of ancient Egypt, because who isn't? When I was about 12 or so, I remember watching something on the Discovery Channel on the excavation of Alexandria, you know, the sunken city in Egypt, and thought, wait a minute, you can do this stuff underwater too. How cool. So that was the turning point in my youth of deciding what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I went to Texas A&M at Galveston to get a degree in maritime studies, which was a focus in not only underwater archaeology, but many different facets of the sea and study of maritime culture. And then from there, I went to Texas A&M University and got my master's degree in anthropology with a focus in nautical archaeology. And that is primarily the study of wooden shipbuilding technology and how that evolves through time. And I've further focused on conservation of materials from submerged environments there. So that led me all over the world, and I've been able to work in Puerto Rico and Texas, and most recently I was the head conservator for a lab in Bodrum, Turkey for a number of years.
That's great.
Yeah, diving on shipwrecks in the Aegean from the Bronze Age up through the Hellenistic period, and then getting to play with artifacts from 1200 BC all the way up to the 20th century. And then eventually that led me to Queen Intervention, moving back to the States.
That sounds fascinating. And I'm sure the difference between Turkey and Texas, quite large.
Yeah, it's culturally very distinct.
So what do you, as far as looking at archaeology as an art and a science, what do you think it brings to modern life? What can we learn from something like a shipwreck like this?
I think like what Courtney mentioned as well is that mystery of, well, how did people live back then and how does it relate to me? Because one question we get asked somewhat frequently is, well, why should we care about this stuff? Mm-hmm. And for me, it's the study of history is so pertinent to who we are as a culture now. So I'm drawn into that mystery as well, and just piecing together all of the bits to a puzzle and trying to solve a greater issue, and trying to understand how people thought and how people lived 300 years ago, and how that may be similar or different than us today.
I think you could draw a lot of parallels between the way things were historically and the way things are now, just because we're all people.
Right.
How's that for out there?
Yeah, and I honestly think we don't pay attention to history quite enough, which is why we start to see it repeating itself, which is tragic in some ways. And so I completely agree with you on all of that kind of stuff. What have you been able to learn about both the history of the ship, maybe before Blackbeard had it, and what have you been able to learn about possibly Blackbeard himself through the process? Well,
what we know about the ship before Blackbeard had it comes mainly from historical records. We do know that it was the French slave ship Le Concorde when he captured it, but it had a much longer life as both a privateer and then a slave vessel. We had a fantastic researcher who went and spent a lot of time digging through French archives to get as much information as he could about this particular vessel. And surprisingly, there isn't that much out there. Like, we don't really know exactly when the ship was built or where it was built. But we do know about it serving as a privateer for a couple of years, and then it made 3 slave voyages, on the third of which it was captured by Blackbeard. We don't really know, we don't have any ships plans. A lot of other projects eventually, once they come up with an identification, can oftentimes come across a ship's plan, and we don't actually have much of a wooden ship left on the site. So that's a continuing mystery, trying to figure out what it actually looked like, how it was constructed. I saw a different pirate exhibit that I went to see once that there seems to be some indication that pirates made changes to their vessels, added decks, moved things around to make them more usable for them. So those are the kinds of things that we don't know about the original ship as well.
Just because there's not much of it left.
Right.
We do know that he added weapons to it. The
Right.
French were not carrying as many guns as he was purported to have carried. So other pirates who were sailing with him said he had 40 on board. We've only found 30, but that certainly doesn't mean that we may not find more.
Sure.
Yeah, so as far as what the shipwreck has told us about its life with Blackbeard and himself, it's hard to say. There's still a lot of mystery around the wreck, why it sank. We can't really pinpoint that answer just yet. The testimonies of other pirates, of course, said that he did it on purpose, but with so much material that we have, that's still kind of a question that we're considering is, was it intentional or was it accidental? Because they left a lot of stuff behind. And as far as Blackbeard goes, I don't know what we've learned about him necessarily. He's just the fact that he's such an elusive character to pin down, and he's such an enigma. We know very little about his origins, or none at all, really. It's kind of a lot of conjecture.
Sure.
As far as that goes, and unfortunately, we haven't found, his private diary or anything on board. Anything with Blackbeard was here is inscribed in it. So yeah, we're hoping, we're hoping to learn more, certainly. And like Courtney mentioned, there's still quite a lot of shipwreck left down there, so there's no telling what's still there. Right.
I would love to see the ship's log where it's like, ship's log, did not trim beard again today.
Yep.
And then you would know for sure. That's really interesting. So you said you've gotten through about 60% of the wreck so far, and so that leaves quite a bit more left to do, and gives you at least another 20-25 years probably of stuff to take care of.
I think someone estimated once that if we could maintain our staffing, and this was back when we only had 3 or 4 of us on staff, it would take about 50 years to complete all the conservation.
Wow. Okay, so job security is there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think we can safely plan on retiring here as long as the state agrees to keep paying us. You can always count on, for every day in the field, you probably have a month's worth of work in the lab. So certainly the lab work and the research and conservation, that takes years beyond just the excavation alone.
Certainly, yeah. Now, when you're bringing this stuff up and you've finished the process of conserving it, where do those artifacts go after that?
All of our artifacts will go to the Maritime Museum in Beaufort, and they actually have a really great permanent exhibit there right now, which they are planning to expand. We're coming up on the tricentennial of the grounding in 2018, so there'll be a big, festival throughout the state for that.
The Year of Blackbeard.
The Year of Blackbeard. And they also do loan things out to other museums from the Maritime Museum in Beaufort. So we have some artifacts in other museums in the state, a museum in Raleigh and a museum in Elizabeth City. And then there is actually a very small exhibit of artifacts at the National History Museum in Smithsonian National History Museum in D.C.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. Yeah. And so you said the tricentennial of the wreck itself. I see what you mean.
The wreck itself.
I was like, wow, you guys been at a long time.
No.
And that's great. Okay, so we can see it at the Maritime Museum in Beaufort. That's fantastic. Do you ever give any tours of your conservation facility or anything?
Yes, we do. We have a setup. We do first Tuesday of every month. scheduled tours. And then we do also provide a lot of tours to educational groups that can't necessarily make it on a Tuesday. We think it's really important to kind of, show people what conservation is and the importance of this history. We do open houses as well. So our next big event will be Saturday, November 19th, and we will have lab tours that day throughout the day. And then we do a really big, exciting, hands-on open house in the spring as part of the North Carolina Science Festival. And it's kind of geared more towards kids, but kids of all ages.
Yay, that's me.
All right.
That's great. That's that all sounds really, really fun. And so people can find out about all the stuff you're doing at qaronline.org, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great. And so as far as outside of tours and things like that, is the process kind of like I don't even know how to explain this, but sort of day after day where you're just kind of chugging along, or are there big events that come up that you're kind of anticipating, or giant surprises that come up out of the water that you weren't anticipating?
We'll see. we do get the occasional moment, when something comes out of the water and you just kind of think, okay. I think one of those moments occurred years ago, very early on in the excavation, when they actually recovered the ship's toilet. That was probably one of the most interesting days on board. It certainly wasn't expected, so that came up and has caused quite a stir since. That is in the museum now. And yeah, there are always little surprises here in the lab that you're not expecting. Particularly when you're breaking down concretion, you run across something, glass or fabric or leather or something you didn't know was there. Those little surprises, but yeah, I would have loved to have been on the dive where someone discovered that they found the toilet.
Yeah, right. You guys will never guess what I found, man.
Yeah. We do also plan to have, we plan around bigger events, well, not events, but projects like the cannon conservation itself. So we have a day or two a month where they work on the cannon, and one of the fun days is when they're actually boring the cannon so that concretion will get down inside the cannon. And it's always fun to decide whether or not the cannon is going to still be loaded. And as of late, they have been. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Now, that's interesting because that almost sort of points in the direction of either just general readiness or that something was about to happen where they had just loaded the cannons. Although from what I know, they often traveled with a charge in them sort of ready to go. So, but that would be interesting to see where that points historically for what was happening at the time.
Right. And that is one of the things where it's in the back of our mind as well. I think we're sitting at about 75% of the cannons that we've explored have so far been loaded.
Fascinating. That's really interesting. Do you each have like a favorite piece that has come up?
We get asked that all the time and never have an answer prepared.
I know, they're all your children.
Yeah, exactly.
They are. You spend so much time with them. I think I've had a couple. Right now I'm working on what appears to be a musket partial that should be in the exhibit in 2018. So that's coming up. So that's pretty exciting. People in general, just guns are so recognizable. So that's really cool that it's historical and, that it's found on a pirate ship. That's probably one of the coolest things I've worked on. And then a couple of years ago, we recovered a powder ladle, which is a giant brass scoop that would have been on the end of a very long pole and just helped add the charge to the back of the cannon, help load the cannon with gunpowder. So that was a pretty exciting find because it came up and it was still very brassy and pretty. And so that's also in the museum now.
Wow, neat. Those sound really great.
I think I kind of really enjoy the really small personal artifacts. So we find things like sewing pins and glass beads. We found 2 pairs of cufflinks, buttons, the kind of things that represented the people's everyday lives. Mm-hmm. It's just a kind of a neat connection to the history of the wreck. Yes, but they're also people.
Right. Oh my gosh, these old people were people. Who knew?
Yeah.
Well, great. I'm really glad we got a chance to do this after a couple of tries. I forgot, you forgot. It all works out. But is there anything I didn't ask you about that you would like people to know?
I can't think of anything.
All right, then. I did my job well.
We do have a Facebook page that we try to keep up with as well.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, yes, and I'll make sure that the website and the Facebook page are all in the show notes and all that kind of good stuff. So we will send some folks over there to check out all the great things you're doing. So thank you again for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
And there it is, friends. That is my interview with Courtney Page and Kim Kenyon from the Queen Anne's Revenge Project. You can find out all about what they're doing and all that good stuff at qaronline.org. And go check that out. Lots of great stuff on their website there. And we can find out more and more and more about the Queen Anne's Revenge and Blackbeard and all that good stuff. Under the Crossbones, sponsored by Pirate Radio, the Treasure Coast, WKKC-DB, playing the best music and pirate radio talk. You can listen to this show, Under the Crossbones, on both their stations. Just go to pirateradioTheTreasureCoast.com or pirateradiotc.com. And don't forget to download the apps. They've got the Pirate Radio Treasure Coast app, which is their music station. And then they've got the Pirate Radio Talk app, which is their talk station. And like I said, you can hear Under the Crossbones on both those stations. They play the new episode on Sunday mornings, and they spin back episodes. I'm not sure when, but they're on there. Also, we got an ebook, free ebook for you. It's Alexander Exquemelin's Pirates of Panama or Buccaneers of America, whichever title you prefer. And if you've not read it, fantastic Golden Age book about pirates written by Alexander Exquemelin, who was a surgeon on a ship, and he was hobnobbing and rubbing elbows with all these piratey guys, right? And so it's a really great book from the period you should check out. I've got a free copy of it for you. Just go to underthecrossbones.com and click on the free ebook link. Or if you're out and about and don't have a browser in front of your face, or you're just lazy or whatever, that's cool. Just text the word pirate and your email address to 94253. Just text the word pirate and your email address to 94253, and it will give you back a little link to download the ebook right to your phone. How awesome is that? Technology at work. Yeah. All right, we got some comedy music on the show today. Yes, we do. We have comedy from Christy Ono, who is a great San Francisco comic. And one of those comics that every time I work with her, I watch her set and I go, oh my gosh, she's such a joy to see on stage. She's really great. She's very quirky, and I think you're gonna dig her a lot. So Christy Ono is coming up, and then we're gonna have some music from Diamond D and the Stargazers. This is the new single off their new album called Consciousness Express. That's the name of the song. And I was writing some promotional materials for this band over the last week or so, some bio stuff and whatever. And so I thought I'd spin you one of their tunes since I've been listening to them. So we're going to hear Consciousness Express from Diamond D and the Stargazers. But first, some comedy from Christy Ono. Here we go.
Does this ever happen to you? Do you ever get so cold you feel like you're going to throw up? Okay. What about this? Do you guys, whenever you're in the shower, ever pretend to drop something just as an excuse to get into the fetal position? Yeah, me neither. So I'm bipolar. Yay! And heavily medicated, so don't worry, we're all safe. But being bipolar, this means that if I'm not nice to you, there's only a 50% chance it's because I don't like you. However, if I am nice to you, there is a 100% chance I am manic and we're going to have a great time. Go get Mama some Coke. So being bipolar, I do find myself depressed a lot. Okay, do you guys ever find yourself just depressed enough to kill yourself, but so full of self-loathing you don't want to give yourself the satisfaction? Because that's about baseline for me. Because one day I woke up so depressed, I had the thought, maybe I should get pregnant. Right? Just have something to kill. Taking self-destruction to whole new levels, guys. So, I'm at that age where all of my friends are getting married and pregnant. Not necessarily in that order. But it's kind of made me reevaluate my life and check in with myself as where I am as a lady. And, I don't want children. This is what happened this morning when I was having my coffee. I saw 3 out of 5 babies dressed as animals. To me, this means that 3 out of 5 of those parents should have just gotten a pet.
friends, that is our episode for this week, episode number 65. If you want to check out all the show notes, videos, links, all that kind of good stuff, head on over to underthecrossbones.com/065. If you want to hear more about the Queen Anne's Revenge and the stuff that Kim and Courtney are working on over there, go to QARonline.org. QARonline.org. If you want to find out more about comedian Christy Ono, go to rabidpixie.tumblr.com. Rabidpixie, one of my favorite usernames I've seen. If you want to hear more from Diamond D and the Stargazers, check out diamonddandthestargazers.com. And very soon, you'll probably be able to see the bio that I wrote for them on that website. Make sure that you're subscribed on iTunes. If you haven't left us a nice little 5-star review over there yet, please go do that. I like to read them and it helps. And make sure that you're subscribed iTunes, Stitcher, Slacker, Google Play, Podcast Addict, Overcast, any Pocket Cast, wherever you dig your podcasts up from. Make sure that you're subscribed there because that makes the show better. It does, yes. And again, you can find all the show notes for this episode at underthecrossbones.com/065. Thank you again for listening, and I will catch you next week. Bye.